thank you, Father. You give us a great day. I think for most of us, it was a gorgeous day today after miserable days. And so we're thankful for that little bit. And we're thankful for a group that wants to come together and study this library of ancient texts and try to see if there's something for us and just to understand you a little bit more and how you made this Bible to speak to us. So help us, keep us humble, keep us open-minded, even maybe give us some extra doses of intelligence here as we think through these things. We can learn from anybody and everybody. So I'm grateful for all the different levels that people are in this class. So give us lots of encouragement and lots of new stuff to see. That's what we're looking for in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Let's see. Let's get rid of that. Facebook friends, we're glad you're here, along with all of our regulars. And I don't think any new people, but maybe. I'm not looking real carefully, but we're glad you all are here. If you're on Facebook, you're just now jumping on, we would still love to have you on Zoom. Just jump on Tuesday School on Facebook and press the link there to Zoom and it'll get you right in. I don't think you need a passcode. If you do, it's Shalom, but you shouldn't need it. It should go straight there. But we'd love to have you over here hanging out. It's encouraging when we have lots of people on here. You don't have to say anything. You can keep it in the dark if you want, but we love having you. For everybody who's watching online, everybody I see here knows this, but this is what we do. We try and be a little bit more academic. Maybe I'm pretending to myself that this is more academic, but we're just trying to take it a step further than your average Sunday school class and ask the bigger questions and ask, some critical questions of the Bible, step outside the evangelical box a little bit. Even though most of us, well, maybe that's not even true. I don't even know if most of us are evangelicals. A bunch of us are evangelicals here. But we just want to be honest with the Bible and let it do what it does. So we've been doing some topical studies. We're going through these bizarre creatures that exist in these Bible texts, Old and New Testament. And we've kind of camped out for the last 2 weeks on the adversary, the Satan. I was going to do 2 or 3 weeks on it. It looks like it's going to be 4 or 5 weeks because people wanted to go and look at passages that didn't have anything to do with Satan, but that everybody thinks have to do with Satan. So that makes perfect sense, of course. And I don't mean that sarcastically. It really does, because these are the passages that we think of. So last week we did Genesis chapter 3 about the serpent. And I think we showed at least that text doesn't say straight out that there's a Satan character there. It's just a snake. It's a very wise snake that talks. Okay, so it's a little bit of a creepy snake. And so that would at least give you some reason to think, okay, there's something else in there, right? It's not just a snake, because it's a talking snake, and that's strange. And we've learned a little bit about seraphs in the past, so we know that there's weird snakes out there, like flying, fiery snakes and stuff, and maybe that might have a piece of it that's going on there. But it wasn't overt anyway, that there was a Satan. There was no word Satan in there, just a snake that talks and convinces them to do the wrong thing. Then last week we jumped over to Ezekiel. So that was also last week, both of these last week. And we started down the path of Ezekiel. We read through it all. And I just wanted to remind everybody about where we were. So I pulled up, everybody's favorite Christian website. If you have questions, you're going to go to Christianity.com. And you're going to see, anytime you have questions, you're just going to go there. It's going to give you this information. Okay, and so this is kind of like a little summary. You remember last time they're trying to convince us that this person, whose name is in Latin Lucifer, they're trying to tell us that Lucifer is found in Ezekiel 28. Okay, and that this is the fall of Lucifer. Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. These are the two passages. And we looked at that and we saw that it was introduced, at least Ezekiel 28, leads us to a king of Tyre. But while this was the literal thing that was happening there, right, it's telling us how bad the king of Tyre is, how he was conceited and all that stuff. It seems like the passage is using some sort of background information like a myth in the background, in order to compare this king of Tyre to. So it's too simple for us simply to say, well, it's the king of Tyre. It's not Satan, so it's done. It seems like there's a comparison. There's something else happening here that convinces us that there's something else in the background. But Ezekiel 28, we found, has no mention of the word Lucifer and no mention of the word Satan. So these are all interpretations. Okay, we got to get there. And so we did all of that last week. I don't want to go into great detail, but I want to take just a few minutes to walk through it, especially what I highlighted in yellow right there. So now there are things that are true of this king that at least ultimately cannot be said to be true of human beings. Okay, so it's definitely the king of Tyre, but there's something else, right, that leads us to think it's something else. It's not true of human beings. For example, the king is portrayed as having a different nature from man. Okay, so we could list these. Different nature. Okay, so what's the nature of this particular king here? In verse 14, he's a cherub. Okay, so we know it can't be a human if it's a cherub, right? Thinking back to all that we've learned about cherubs so far, is it possible for a human to be a cherub? What did we define a cherub as mostly?
Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
A
guardian.
The realm of God or something.
Yeah, guarding the realm of God, right? And what we said last week at the very end, I think Craig asked a great question. I think it was Craig. He asked, where does it talk about Adam being a guardian or a cherub? And it doesn't call him a cherub, but it does call him a guardian in that word shamar, to guard and to keep, to shavar and avad, the garden. Okay, so it uses those words. Yours might say something like to keep the garden. Okay, the point, though, is to keep the garden from harm, from something coming in that shouldn't be there, like talking serpents that try and get them to go in a different direction than God. Right? So it's possible that mankind could be this. Right? That Adam, this was my big reveal at the very end. Those of you who made it to the very end. But I think Ezekiel is talking about Adam. Okay, now, I'm not going to say that it's just Adam. There might be other mythology in the background of that too. Okay, so things can carry more weight than themselves, especially if you're making illustrations, if you're making analogies to things. They can be kind of big picture. They could be like Adam can be like an actual human, and he can represent humankind, and he can represent Israel. He might be able to be all those things at the same time. That's how literature works. It's super cool. Okay, so maybe there's something more here, but the point was that just because he's a different nature, they're saying it has to be Lucifer, has to be Satan. I'm saying, no, it could actually be a man. It's not actually a different nature. You can't say that. The second thing it says is he had a different position from man. That is, he was blameless. Man is not blameless, except many men in the Old Testament are said to be blameless, right? So especially Adam, right? He was blameless until deceit was found in him. Okay, so you can be blameless at the same time. He was in a different realm from man. Okay, that is the holy mount of God. But we found out last week that the holy mount of God is what? Like the cosmic mountain is Eden. Eden is the place where God dwells. So that's the holy mountain of God. Ezekiel is actually going to call it a holy mountain. It's going to call Eden. It's going to represent that later on in Ezekiel. So certainly it could happen. He received a different judgment from man. That is, he was cast out of the mountain of God and thrown to the earth in verse 16. See, as long as you keep thinking about it as Lucifer, then you think the holy mountain has to be in heaven or something, and he gets kicked out and thrown to earth. But that's because you're already coming to the passage with these presuppositions. This is the problem. So we want to say, well, the holy mountain is right there on earth. It's Eden. And yes, he gets removed from Eden. We all saw it happen, right? It's in Genesis 3. He kicks him out of Eden, out of the holy mountain of God. And the superlatives used to describe him don't seem to fit that of a normal being, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, having the seal of perfection. Okay? I think they do. Okay? Adam is full of wisdom until deceit is found in him. He is perfect in beauty. He said like this is good, right? He's a seal of perfection. So he's supposed to be this perfect representative. Again, we don't have to think has zero sin. He's blameless. That's the better way of saying it, right? He doesn't have anything to go against him. Okay, so that was all last week. Anything that you guys want to bring up? We just ran up against the time clock last week, remember? So I wanted to make sure that you had enough time to talk about this before we went to Isaiah. Let me stop sharing that, if I can figure out how to get it there. So I can see the rest of you. Oh, how nice. Now I can see everybody. Okay, does this make sense? It doesn't matter to me one bit if you don't think this is Adam. Okay, that doesn't matter to me. But I want you to see that it's not automatically Satan. Okay, that seems to be pretty obvious there. But it could be representing something that happened in the past about some creature, maybe a Satan figure, some god of the past that did elevate himself up and was removed from the presence of God. That is possible. Adam could be one of those myths, but there could be others, like Venus. The story of Venus is a similar story, or Bel-Hadad, right, would lift himself up into these places. So these are all ancient myths that are all being used in the literature in order to talk about the king of Tyre.
Well, this Adam that we're talking about, it sounds like he's a single person, and yet we wonder if Adam is a single person or a people, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, yeah. So if Adam happens to equal Israel or humankind, how does this work then? I mean, you still have the same thing. It's represented as one person, but this big group can also become conceited. Israel is still a representative for God, and on the holy mountain, in Jerusalem, gets exiled out of the place. Like it still all works. But the story it's grabbing hold of is the singular person, Adam. Right? That doesn't mean that there is a singular person, Adam, but the story is about a singular person that represents something bigger than that. I realize I'm looking at faces. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is actually not that easy probably to understand. So if I tell a story about a door, right? You have to picture a literal door in your head, right? You have to know that there's a door there. But then when I show you that the door is actually Jesus or something like that, a gate, you still have to have in your head the picture that the story is. It's of a door being opened to go into something. But now you know the door, is opening, like Jesus is opening is kind of the idea. That make things like there's always a literal thing that you have to picture in your head in order to make the analogy work. So Adam is a man, with a belly button, without a belly button. Don't worry about that stuff, right? He's a man. And then he represents something else, something bigger than that. None of this I'm talking about is a reality. It's all in literature. This is the way literature works. So that's why I said, we're doing Bible stuff. We're not doing theology stuff. You're going to have to take a whole other leap to say, well, was there a man or was there just Israel? Was Israel even a real thing? Right? I mean, we don't have all that much evidence for Israel. We have a few archaeological things that represent it, but does it look like that, the way that we see it? Anyway, so there's a difference between the literature and the actual thing that's taking place. Okay. I feel like maybe we just need to do a whole lot of that sometime, but that's all right. Okay, so let's go to Isaiah, and then that will bring all of this together, maybe, because unlike what Christianity today says about this being Lucifer in Ezekiel 28, and we're not seeing anything there, the word Lucifer does show up in Isaiah 14, which is helpful. It's the place it shows up. Yay! And what we've done is we've just said, well, this is the name of Satan, and then we've put the word Lucifer on all the other passages, knowing that Satan, of course, is an angel of light who used to be called Lucifer and got kicked out of heaven, even though that doesn't take place anywhere. Okay, it just takes place maybe in background mythology. But we have to extrapolate out in order to do that. All right, so let's look at Isaiah 14. Sorry if Ezekiel was hard, those of you who weren't here last week. We took almost the whole thing to walk through Ezekiel. All right, Isaiah 14, starting in verse, what do we say, 12 maybe? Yeah. So does anybody want to read starting in verse 12 and ending in, I don't know, like maybe verse 19, the end of 19? Probably don't even need to go that far, to be honest. Could probably just go to 14 or 15, but yeah, just read a little bit of context. Anybody want to do this one? Isaiah 14, 12, and following.
How have you fallen from heaven, O star of morning, son of the dawn? You have been cut down to the earth. You have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly. In the recesses of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Nevertheless, you will be thrust down to Sheol, to the recesses of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you. They will ponder over you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a wilderness and overthrew its cities? Who did not allow his prisoners to go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you have been cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch, clothed with the slain, who are pierced with a sword, who go down to the stones of the pits like a trampled corpse.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, and it keeps going, of course, all the way through to verse 22. But yeah, I think that's a great place to stop. Okay, so this is the passage that talks about let's see. Okay, thank you. You got him. This is the passage that talks about Lucifer. Where do you see it? Because Pop didn't read anything about Lucifer in there.
Assumption, you have fallen from heaven.
Okay, yep. It is in verse 12, how you have fallen from heaven. Who?
Morning star, son of dawn.
Yeah.
That's right. Morning star. Okay, so this is that in Latin, morning star. Lucifer. Yeah. So does anyone say Lucifer? Maybe if you've got a King James, it says Lucifer or something. But at this point, all of you have thrown your King James away probably, so you don't even know. But that's where it comes from. It's the passage that shows up. I mean, this is where we get our doctrine that Lucifer was the first, an archangel that lost everything. He fell from heaven. O morning star, son of the dawn, how are you cut down to the ground? You who laid the nations low. But don't go any further. Let's just find out. We know the context here. You know well enough to look at the earlier parts to know who this is talking about. Who is it actually talking about?
King of Babylon.
The king of Babylon. Okay, which is very similar to the king of Tyre before. We're talking about a king who obviously sets himself up to be like God, which is a pretty normal thing for kings to do because they look awesome and they have all the power. They're sovereign. They can do whatever they want. So it's easy to get conceited when you're complete sovereign over everything, right? So this is what happens, and especially Babylon, because Babylon is a whole empire. It's taking over way more than just its little areas of Babylon. It's creeping over the entire earth. So it's his pomp, his pride, it's his awesomeness that makes him conceited, and that has him get kicked out in verse 12. You're fallen from heaven, son of the dawn. How you are cut to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said, I'm going to ascend to heaven. I'm going to raise my throne above the stars of God. Stars of God is often a euphemism for angels or gods, beings in the universe. Everyone has always looked throughout most of time. They've looked at the stars as being living creatures. And so I'm putting myself above all the other ones. I'm going to sit on the Mount of Assembly on the heights of Zaphon. That word Zaphon just means north in the Hebrew. At least in my text, it just transliterates the word Zaphon because it's also a place. Like Zaphon is the north, and it's on the Mount of Assembly. What do we call the Mount of Assembly? You guys have been listening for a while. We got other words for this?
Zion.
Zion. Okay. So yeah, but this is Zaphon though. So this is Zaphon, so it's the north. So this is like the Canaanites, the Babylonian, well, Canaanites, it's their assembly of the gods. Or we often call it the divine council. Okay, so this is where all the gods get together with their round table, hanging out, having conversations, and Yahweh is one of those gods. And he is probably brought in, he's like probably a sea god that comes in. That's too much. You don't need to know about that. So yeah, Yahweh
Thanks for
takes
confusing
over
us.
the pantheon. What was that, Josh?
Thanks for confusing us. Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point in history, Yahweh takes over the pantheon from El, the Canaanite god, the head of the pantheon. And you guys know this, right? So El is the head god, and then there are a lot of gods underneath him, right? At some point, there was probably a god named Yahweh in Israelite world. He takes over. He's the God of Israel, of course, but they start equating him with the main God because they realize that he's the God of the universe. And so he comes in and he takes over the Canaan area and then beyond, right? That's the way it goes in their minds. That's extra stuff. You don't need to know about that. But gods and humans and countries all have evolution, in literature. They are understood differently as years go by. So at some point, Baal is a good god that does all these wonderful things, a rising god. Sometimes Baal is a dead god, just depends on the time of the year, right? Because these are fertility gods that rise and fall with the fall and spring. They die and they come back to life. So there's an evolution to gods. So if you read some of the Ugaritic myths, like in that same area, some of those myths, you're going to see that Baal is sometimes a son of God, a son of El, and sometimes he's equated with him. It just depends on what myths you're reading and when.
I have a question. How recent in scholarship did we become familiar with these other gods and this kind of idea of Yahweh taking over El, and how recent is that?
So the first answer is we've known about the other gods as long as people have been doing theology in general. So any kind of studies at all, because they're mentioned in the Bible. There's lots of ones. Baal's mentioned in the Bible, right? Chemosh or Marduk or Tiamat. Like we have connections to some of the, well, not Marduk, but we have connections, Leviathan, right? They're out there. When do we start to follow some sort of an evolution of the gods?
Yeah, like the pantheon idea of like Yahweh overtaking El or whatever, like this idea.
I would guess that would be in the 1800s. That would be my guess, 1800s and 1900s. So in the time of like German critical scholarship, as they start thinking through those kinds of things. But I don't know the answer to that truly. Okay, I know Mark Smith's great book, Yahweh and the Gods, or Elohim and the Gods, he's at New York University, and that's like a late 1990s book, I think. So, but he's working with other people's things for the last 50 years before that. Anyway, none of that stuff was important. Sometimes I just say stuff and I've got to follow up with it. So the divine council is what we're talking about here, right? We've known about the divine council. It shows up in lots of different passages, as early as Genesis 1, right? When God says things like, let us make man in our image. Okay, he's talking to a group of gods or angels or superior beings of some kind that are made. So mankind is made in that image. And we see it all the way through. I mean, there are some books that actually use the word divine council. Psalms, I can't remember. Psalm uses the words. I know Kings uses the word. A prophet goes into it. Isaiah goes into the divine council. We're about to see the divine council in the book of Job. That's going to come up here next. So it's just a group of people, sorry, a group of gods that are speaking about what's going to happen next, right? Speaking about the world. So here they are. They're going to sit on the Mount of Assembly. So whoever this thing is, this king of Babylon, he wants to sit in the place of the gods. Okay, that's what it's trying to say. He's human, but he wants to sit in the place of the gods. Or maybe he is a lesser god who wants to sit in the major gods area. He's conceited. He wants to go up. I'll ascend to the tops of the clouds. I'll make myself like the Most High. So I'm guessing that's El Shaddai there. But you are brought down to Sheol. So that Sheol is just the word grave, to the depths of the pit or the abyss. There are those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, right? An emperor? Is this guy? Look, this is what happened because you got thrown down. Who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities and would not let the prisoners go home. All the kings lie in glory. You're cast away from your grave like loathsome carrion, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so again, no mention of the word Satan, right? So there's no Satan here. But that doesn't mean that there is no Satan here. So we got to be fair to interpretations. Somebody's going back and looking at this and saying, this is the picture that we have from Revelation 12, for instance, where the dragon sweeps a third of the stars out of heaven, right? And they're connecting this to the Isaiah passage. And they're saying, it looks like he's conceited and he gets kicked out of heaven too. Okay. By the way, whenever we say the word heaven, almost always what we mean is sky, right? That's generally what we're talking about here. So it's the kingdom of the sky, the kingdom of heaven. And so it's where the stars are at. So in the sky, and they get kicked out, or it's the place of power, the place of authority. So being kicked out of heaven just means you get kicked out of that high place, whatever that is. Okay, so it could mean God's realm, sure, but it could also mean lots of other things. It could mean anything lower than that they're being moved from. And so interpreters are going to go a lot of different places. Some people are going to end up with a Satan idea here, but I think you can see that it's not clear, at least. Right? There's no passage here that says that it's Satan. And there's nothing so far. All we've seen from an adversary so far is that he stands opposed to something. Right? And this one definitely fits that. The Ezekiel passage fits that. He seems opposed to God in some way, saying for you to do something different than what God has told him to do. So it has a Satan characteristic, an adversary, an opposition, an accuser kind of position. But not not the Satan that we're talking about, not the one that's like the malevolent being that God and Satan are always in a battle with, like in our mythology of today. Maybe there's something to this, but it's nothing like what we're talking about in modern day when we think about, not even in modern day, in New Testament times. New Testament times, Satan seems to be in opposition to God. Like they're two beings opposed to each other. Things have evolved. Things have been moving forward from there. We're not getting to the New Testament today, but there's that movement. All right. Anything else we need to see from Isaiah? Any other questions that you have? Or just want to throw out a completely different view just to show that it could be that way?
Is it possible that the other gods and the structure that's put on them is a syncretic interpretation of various cultures' background? All of them sensing that there's a God force, which we believe as Christians. And it goes back to the Shema, where God is declaring that he is the creating God of everything. But from a different culture's perspective, they may have thought the same thing. So it's more like a battle of the minds. And then the philosophers that read the various inputs try to put a story that makes all of that make sense.
All right, so that was a lot. So let's see. So yes, I think you used the word syncretistic. So we have lots of different views of God, and they get combined together. That's what you were saying by that word, syncretistic, right? Yes, I'm just trying to figure out where. So they're having a literary battle about whose God is best, whose God is the God above everything else. So Babylon would have a different God, Canaanites would have a different God, and Israelites would have a different God. But they're all representing whatever that high God is. They just think it's theirs, and it has different characteristics. Same thing we do with Allah today, right? Like, are Allah and Yahweh the same God? I mean,
Maybe.
yeah, I mean, like it's a misnomer. Like you can't speak like that. You can't say they're the same God. We're both talking about whatever that high God is. We both just define them very differently, right? So my guess is we in this group right here don't even have the same Jesus all the time, right? That is, you think of Jesus very differently. Your Jesus, packs an AK-47, for instance, or wears a cardigan like Fred Rogers. Maybe he's a peacekeeper, maybe he's a warmonger, right? Like we all see Jesus very differently too. So yeah, they would have all seen God very differently and all fighting for their God to be at the top of the pantheon. So yeah, I think they would have. And then the literature is how they fight those things out. Yep. I mean, that's like even Psalm 29 is a Canaanite psalm. It's pretty much consensus. It's a psalm that's written not to Yahweh, but that's been changed, been scrubbed out of the original names and written in to Yahweh. So all the things that were said of other gods, let's see, Canaanite, I think it's a Baal psalm, has been scrubbed out. And we know that because we see other psalms that look just like that in the Baal myth, but also because the cadence of the song in Hebrew is wrong if you put the word Yahweh versus Baal, right? So it changes. So the cadence is messed up in there. So these are things that just scholars think about. So it's a way of saying, of changing their God and saying, oh, you think your storm God was awesome. Let me tell you about my storm God. He can do all of your things easily, and we'll add a couple extra lines to show he's even more special than yours. I don't know if I spoke to what you wanted to speak to there. Did I help there at all? That's to you, Tom. Did I help at all?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're looking to your left, and I'm on the other side of my screen.
Oh yeah. Sorry about that. I'm looking where you are. You're top left. You're the number one Uno spot for me.
So, so it could be by perspectives of philosophers over the centuries, even though some of the data that we point to, like the Shema, was written before the philosophers of, say, the 1800s were even born yet. So there's some time confusion, at least. And you mentioned Allah versus Yahweh. They're different philosophically.
Sure.
Allah tells them to do things through Muhammad uh, that are totally inconsistent with Christianity or even Hebrew thought.
Right, and that was my point. But we're both saying that they're the high God. So whatever, we're trying to interpret that high God by saying, here's what we think the high God looks like. They're saying, here's what we think the high God looks like. Ours is transcendent. Ours is both transcendent and immanent. And so we're all trying to compete for whatever that position is. So we're not saying that Allah and Yahweh are just, the same characteristics work in both of them. But we are saying they're both the high God in their particular place. Yeah. And Islam, of course, does speak through Muhammad. And yeah, Christianity speaks through Jesus. So there's a lot of similarities, a lot of things that are consistently true of both, I think. And there are some real contradictions. There are some real things that we don't like and they don't like about us. Yep.
I've got a question on verse 12.
Okay.
So, morning star, son of dawn. Morning star, I've heard it be referred to planet Venus. I'm wondering if there are special connotations in the time period culture or other religions that make this star set apart from the rest of them because it is a wanderer. Or if it's just, oh, this is the one we're going to call the king of Babylon at this time period. It's like we're going to make him Venus instead of, say, any other star in the sky.
No, I think there's a Venus myth about maybe that's what you were just saying about because Venus moves in there. So yes, it's one that would fall or tries to take over other places and stuff like that. So they use that in here as somebody who would do that.
Gotcha. Because of his wandering nature, you can tell that it's not following the cosmic order of everything else. So
That's right. And Yahweh, of course, is all about order. So anybody who, right, like Genesis 6, any of the gods who come down out of the sacred realm without the cherub saying, come, come, it just wanders and does whatever they want. They're bad guys. Yeah. They've got some pride. They've got ego. They think they can do what they want. Yeah. Nuh-uh. So yeah, that's all in the earlier mythology for them. Yeah. All right. Anything else in Isaiah? All right, good. Let's go to Job. Since that's what I prepared for anyway. Didn't prepare for Isaiah, Ezekiel, or Genesis. All right, so we got a lot in Job. I wonder if we want to do Job yet. Maybe. Well, let's just go for it. We'll get as far as we can. What are we gonna do? All right, Job. So Job is probably a late text as well. Some of you on here might be taking a Job class in your Sunday schools. I can't tell if anyone is. Oh, Sharon is, I think. Maybe a couple of others, I'm not sure. But doing a Job thing. So this is a very late text. A lot of people consider Job to be a very early text because it's referring to a patriarchal time period. A lot of the same things that you see in Abraham are taking place in Job, that kind of world. But yes, it's putting a story back, but the writing of it is very late, 6th century. So we're talking about the 500s. Okay, that's probably exilic time period when it's being written. And it's in a genre that is filled with philosophical questions. So it's called a theodicy, and we've got lots of them. I feel like I just talked about this. I don't know where I talked about this. I guess maybe on a Wednesday night class. Sometimes I get them messed up. So the theodicy idea is, why do bad things happen to good people? Right? That's the question. And so it's a defense. It's an apologetic for God. It's trying to say, hey, God's okay. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't you dare say anything bad about God for doing these things. He didn't do anything bad. So it's a way of setting up an apologetic or a defense of God, that it's okay that these bad things happen to good people. And so there's going to be a bunch of friends who are going to come in the story and are going to say, this is the reason. A bunch of philosophical friends. Here's the reason that's happening. They all have good reasons for it happening, and all of their reasons are in line with the Bible. Okay, the Bible says many of those things. And then God's going to come out and say they're all wrong, right? You know this. And by the way, also, he's going to say Job is all wrong. We all like to harp on that one verse where Job was blameless and didn't sin. But when you get past chapter 37, you're going to find that God basically lays him out. And then he says, I'm sorry, I'll shut up now. Right. So I don't know if he sins, but there's definitely a conflict there, and God's not happy with what his answer is to that stuff. But that's not what we're talking about. All we want to do is look at Satan. That's what we're trying to figure out here. So this is what I want us to do as we look at Job chapter 1 and 2. It's 2 chapters of where Satan shows up. And by the way, he doesn't show up. Well, no, I'm not going to answer that. Job 1 and 2. I want you to ask these questions. First, where does Satan come from in this? Second, who instigates the whole Job problem, right? Job seems to be a problem in the text. So who's the instigator of this? Third, who's in charge ultimately in these passages? And why does Satan disappear? And then fifth one, who is Satan? That's what we're trying to figure out, right? All these passages we're trying to figure out who is Satan. So let's look at Job. Job shows up earlier. Job chapter 1. Let's start in verse 6. The first part's going to tell you about Job. He's a man from Uz. He's got some kids. He sacrifices all the time. Super righteous. In case his kids ever do anything wrong, he sacrifices on their behalf, just in case they do. He doesn't even know, but he does anyway. And Job is always consistent and righteous and good. And then we get to verse 6. So somebody want to read up through verse 12, maybe, to start?
I can.
All right.
Verse 6. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser also came among them. The Lord said to the accuser, "Where have you come from?" The accuser answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then the accuser answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to the accuser, "Very well, all that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord.
Okay. So what are some things that we notice from this about Satan? Actually, I'll show you something. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
He's allowed to badmouth him, but not physically change him.
Okay. So he can badmouth, but not physically harm him anyway. All right.
He seems to hang out on the earth, going to and fro on the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just been hanging out on Earth, walking up and down, to and fro. I've just been hanging. Yeah.
He's one of the guys that's regularly invited to the heavenly being hangout.
Right. I love the casualness. That's right. Yeah. He's one of the guys who gets invited to the hangout with the gods. Yep.
God doesn't really know where he came from. He says, "Where have you come from?"
Yep. Yeah. So either God doesn't know or God, is asking for some other reason if we want to be very careful with our theology and stuff. But okay.
He questions God's authority and says, yeah, you think he likes you, but if you challenge him, he's not going to like you. You're not as
Yeah,
powerful as you think.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. He questions God's authority over this. Yeah.
I'll go a verse back and say that God's the one that brings up Job. So Satan's not even talking about him beforehand. And then God's like, how about this guy?
Yeah, he's like, "Have you considered my servant?"
Yeah. It's hilarious. So maybe God's to blame for this whole thing. Like Satan would have been like, everything's fine. Yeah, no problem. God's like, hey, whoa, whoa, let's torture Job for a little while. I mean, he didn't say let's torture him. He just said consider him. This is just interesting. This is an aside, totally free. The verse before the ones we looked at, if you see that, verse 5, it says, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. That little phrase there, that word cursed is not actually cursed in Hebrew. It's actually the word blessed, which is just cool to me. And there's some stuff you could do in this text with that. But the word arur, cursed, doesn't show up here. They just use the word barak to bless. And it's a euphemism for curse because they don't want to write curse. They don't want you to think that they even put the words cursed in it. So has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I was just giving you a little free part there, just for fun. Which is why it takes so long. We wonder why it takes so long to get through these Bible studies, because I keep giving you free dumb things. All right. What else? Anything else in there? How many of yours says Satan and how many of yours says accuser? Riston read accuser every time. Do you guys have Satan? Who has Satan? I only see a few people actually in general, but it looks like almost everyone has Satan in there.
I have adversary.
Adversary. Okay.
That's because I'm looking at the Jewish Bible right now.
Yep. Okay. Good. Yep.
Mine says Satan the accuser.
Ooh, it says both of them. Okay. Interesting. So that's just saying Satan, Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the Hebrew word is Satan. That's a Hebrew word. Like you don't think you know Hebrew, you do. It's Satan, right? That's the word, Satan. And it just means accuser. So if they put Satan the accuser, what they're doing is saying Satan is a proper name. Now let me define him. He's the accuser, which isn't accurate. It's not accurate, right? It's the Satan. So there is no person named Satan here. It's the Satan, the accuser. Okay, just like you would say, I think I used this before, like the escapist, the one who escaped, the one who accused. It might not even be a designation of an individual being. It might be a designation for whatever being is being an accuser at that time, like the one who escapes is an escapist. But next week, it'll be a different one who escapes. He's now the escapist. It's not the same person, just happens to call himself, I am the escapist, right? It's the one who accuses or the one who stands in opposition.
Why do so many translations then have a proper name, Satan?
Well, if you remember from our translation studies, everybody is biased. So this is just what they've done. They've interpreted this as being that being, and so they're making it easy for us to interpret it the same way. It's unfair. I think it's rude to people who don't know Hebrew. And that's why I'd love for you to get a translation that helps you through this. The problem is there is no one translation that solves this problem for you. It's also why I keep telling everyone everywhere I go that you need specialists to understand scripture. You know, I know that people are just like, well, if anybody can just pick up the Bible and understand it. And I keep trying to remind you that is not accurate. You simply can't do that. And I know it sounds good, and I want to be that kind of person who just says, yeah, just pick it up and you'll get it. But none of you know Hebrew, so you can't. It's that simple, right? You need a specialist to at least translate it for you. And whenever they translate it, they're going to interpret it too. You can't do translation without interpretation. So if you just read the Bible alone, and a lot of people say, I just read the Bible, I believe it, it settles it, that's it, right? You probably are not coming up with the right answers to it. Now, that's a little bit harsh because most of the translations are just fine. They'll do what they need to do. And it's not going to end up mattering a whole lot whether this is a being that is having an argument with God or whether this, whether it's a being named Satan or just a being. There is definitely, it's some kind of spiritual being that's in heaven talking to God, right? I mean, it's something. It doesn't, maybe not our Satan that we kind of see in that picture, but it's somebody who opposes or accuses Satan, this being, this Job person. Okay. Now, again, let's remember the difference between literature and reality. I don't want us to ever get far from that. This is a story. Stories can be historically true. Stories might not be historically true. That just depends on the genre of the story. I mean, that's just the particulars of the story. Sometimes it's really obvious when I'm telling a story that this is not a true story. Like if I say once upon a time, you now know not telling a true story. Or for instance, if I say, and the animal, the crow, talked to the fox, you know not a true story. The Bible has those kinds of genre markers as well, all throughout. You don't know them because you live in 2025, right? Not 500 years before Jesus. But if you were living then, you'd probably be able to read some of these genre markers very easily. But some of them are there. When Balaam's donkey decides to talk to him and Balaam has a conversation with him instead of freaking out and killing the donkey immediately because it's demon possessed, you know that means this might not be an actual story that took place, like a real historical story. Because if a donkey talked to you, I hope that you would do something other than just have a normal conversation back. Like you would at least get him on some TV show or something, right? Make some money out of this deal.
You're on
But
some heavy
none
loose
of us really have a scholar who can walk around with this and interpret everything. And in my feeble opinion, every version of the Bible is someone's interpretation of
Yes.
what was said. So isn't it better that we get a Bible that we can understand, read? Like when I follow along what somebody reads in their Bible, it's almost word for word what I've got. That's very little difference. And it's like I can understand what I'm reading in mine and I can enjoy reading it. If I put this down and open up my old King James version, I'm not going to read it.
Right. So it's better to read a not so great translation than to read one that you don't have any idea what's doing, or not to read one at all.
Or to not
So-
read one at all. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people probably do give up because they've got Bibles that they can't understand a word that's being said that
Yeah.
they're reading.
And so yeah, I don't want to go. I wanted to go very hard on that you need a specialist, but now I want to back off on that, especially from what Kathy just said, right? I would rather you be reading it than, you're like, well, in order for me to truly understand it, I have to read 10 commentaries, and I can't do that. So therefore, I'm just not going to read anything. That's not okay either. But I feel like most of us, if we're serious about something, like if this was truly a letter that we believe came from God to give us something, we would try at least to find a little bit more information, which, I'm talking to the choir right now, right? You're here. You're here because you want to understand things a little bit deeper. So you can't do what I do. You can't spend 10 hours working on a class. You got jobs, you have lives, you have other things in your, like, I get it, right? But there are some decent commentaries that will help us out. There are some, videos, like Watch Bible Project videos. Okay, they're just really helpful. They're like 8 minutes. You can have a devotional, and it will really open up the big picture of what's happening in the Bible for you. Listen to some critical scholars on the internet, on YouTube. And if you want those names of people, I can give them to you. They'll help you think through things. They'll be scary, but you're used to that at this point. So, yeah, so keep reading it. By the way, there are better paraphrases too. So if you need something that's very simple, there are better ones than, there's rankings of those as well, right? From the Message to J.B. Phillips to the Book to the Way, all of those different paraphrases. I'm okay with paraphrases. They're helpful. But I would just say read a couple of them. Or read the NIV. I think it's pretty easy, the NIV. Still very biased. Still going to write Satan instead of the Satan, or the accuser. Okay, that was a long offshoot. Sorry for those of you who know all that stuff. Okay, so Job has been found out that he's very righteous. It seems like both Satan and God agree that he's righteous. And the reason that he's righteous is because God has blessed him. Right? He's given him barak, lots of blessings. So if you just take away some of those blessings, then something else is going to happen. All right, so let's go to 13. Wait. Let's see if Satan even shows up here. No, it doesn't. So let's go back to chapter 2, just to make it a little bit shorter. So all of the rest of chapter 1 is all these terrible things happening to his children, to his crops, to his animals, right? Just miserable things, just the worst possible things happening. And that's verse 22 is the ending of that. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Okay, so at this point, he's still righteous. Okay, which causes Satan, the Satan, to have a next conversation. So who wants to read chapter 2 up through verse 10, 1 through 10? Or actually just 1 through 7.
One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." Same story. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Am I reading the right one?
You are. It's the same thing. You're
Okay.
right. Keep going.
All right. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Then Satan answered the Lord, "Skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your power, only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head.
Okay. And that section is going to end with, "In all this, Job didn't sin." And we will never, with his lips, actually, and we'll never see the accuser again in the story. And like most of you, I'm guessing, this is the part of Job that you know. Chapters 1 and 2, and maybe chapter 42. Chapter 42, is that right? Is that the last one? No, I can't remember. Got to learn your chapters. Yeah, 42. Whew. Okay, that's all you know. You know about him losing all the stuff, and you know about him getting all the stuff back. And those 37 chapters in between, 38 chapters, 39 chapters in between. Ugh, nobody wants to read that. Okay, it's long monologues explaining why Job is right or wrong. Okay, all of his friends say, okay, you're wrong about this, and Job says, nuh-uh. They say, well, you're wrong about this, nuh-uh. Right, that's what it is, back and forth the whole way. Okay, now, I said earlier, and I don't think I followed up on this, that there are several different Job stories in the ancient Near East. I mentioned this somewhere recently, Ludlow Bell Nameki. I think I said to read that at some point. There's something called the Sumerian Job. So if you pick up a book like Pritchard's Ancient Near Eastern Texts, or you just Google it, like what are the other Job stories? You could it's probably all in the common domain now. So anybody can read any of that stuff, and you can read some of the other Job stories, and they're fascinating, and they look very similar. Okay, we just call them Job stories because Job is the one we know the most, because we're a Christian. We've had a Christian upbringing for the last hundreds, thousands of years. So those are just more famous to us. And so all the other ones are saying the same thing. They're all theodicies. They're all saying, why did these bad things happen to good people? So very few scholars think the book of Job is a historical story, like it actually took place. And no scholars that I know of think it took place the way that it says it took place. So for instance, we know that people don't give long monologues to their friends and then wait till they're done and, okay, you've concluded your lesson. All right, now I'm going to respond to you. That's just not the way conversations work. So it didn't happen like that. This is literature. It may have actually happened in real life. Something terrible could have happened to them. What we're getting is a glimpse of this cosmic world where Satan and God hang out together. Okay, where the accuser does things with God. They have these conversations. So I don't think we should take our theology and say that this is the way the heavens work. I think that would be going a little bit too far. It's an illustration. It's a prophetic imagination. It's a way to start the story, to say, all these terrible things happened to him. And so it feels like it's a betting game between God and Satan. Like, I'll show you that he's righteous. No, he's not going to be. Right. And it's just something to be gambled on in the heavens. And we're down here going, right? Will we be righteous regardless of what's happening up in the heavens? All right. So what do we think about Satan from this in our last few minutes?
He's a troublemaker,
Okay. Yep.
stirring the pot. And even though we didn't see him anymore after the point you were describing, the effect of his accusations rippled on down through the people, his so-called friends.
Yep. Right. That's a good point. That's a really good point. So I'm gonna write that down just because I wanted to hold on to it. Satan equals the friends. Which is not exactly what Tom said, but is what he was saying. I just summarized. I think that's what he was saying, right? We see it continue down into them. So you might argue that Satan is the foil, the beginning of the story to make it interesting, to give you a cool narrative plot line to start things off, in order to get to the spot where basically you're saying each friend is opposing Job, is accusing Job of being the problem. Okay, so we've got a lot of Satans in this, and God is going to eventually oppose all of them. So God could even be called an opposer, a Satan to them, right? But they're the Satans in this figure. They're going to go against him, and even Job is at some point going to go against God, and God is going to silence him. It's a hugely important point, I think, when working through this book.
Isn't
And
isn't this just the ancient Near Eastern way of trying to explain the problem of evil?
Yes,
Like,
it's exactly what it is.
They're using Satan to explain why bad things happen and God's in control. Because God is in control, but Satan is the one doing it. quote unquote,
Yep.
or the Satan is the one doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we don't want to do is make God the bad guy, right?
But I mean, but it kind of is, right? Like that's the story. They're saying, well, God is the bad guy because he's in control, but he's not. We're going to put this other person in, but this other character in between because God can't be the bad guy, but
Right.
God's still in control.
He's allowing it
So,
to happen.
Yeah. I
If
mean,
he's in control, then he's allowing it to happen. So it's still bottom line, the buck stops with God, kind of thing.
yep. Yeah. Satan has
so
to get
we
permission to do it. Yeah.
so we created Satan because we don't want God to be bad.
Yes. So now I want to be careful with the word creating Satan, but I like that summary, right? Because this is, I think, what you're going to find as we walk through all of these passages, especially when you get to the angels and you get to the demons and stuff. You're going to, well, especially with the angels, right? That these angels are going to show up in situations where we're trying to, where the text is evolving into a new understanding of what God is. So there might be earlier texts that have, for instance, God very anthropomorphized, right? Where God just like hangs out with Adam and Eve and like, what's up, guys? Right? Like they have these kinds of conversations. But as time goes by, they start putting in like the Septuagint will add, or later Hebrew manuscripts will add things like the angel of Yahweh instead of Yahweh. They'll call him the angel of Yahweh, which is a way of mitigating against that, you know, this is how we understood God before, but that's probably not as good as we like. We've moved away from that. Now God is more transcendent, more spiritual. Same way with evil, right? There are things that God used to be able to do, but people started to feel uncomfortable with him being able to do them. So we gave other things those abilities to do that in the literature. So that's kind of what you said. We've created a character that will kind of buffer God a little bit. It's it's not great, like because there's still he's kind of in control, right? And in each one of these situations, like yeah, sure the angel of Yahweh goes through, or the destroyer. Did we talk about the destroyer yet in this class? So the destroyer goes over, right, and kills the firstborn and all that stuff. Yeah, I've been working on it on my own, but I don't know if we talked about it. But so we create something so God isn't doing it, but he's sending somebody to do it. Seems not quite as bad. He doesn't get his hands dirty.
Putin
But
didn't
I think,
invade, Ukraine. The generals that he sent there invaded Ukraine.
yeah. So, but I do think that is what's happening. I think they're trying to protect God from some of these things. And I think you're going to see it very clearly when we get to the Chronicles passage, right, where Satan is getting David to first of all, God is the one who does the census, gets David to do the census, and then in another passage, similar passage, is going to say that Satan is the one who does it, and Chronicles is going to come and defend it, which we'll see later on. Like it needs to be updated, which is our whole last series, right? We have to reimagine constantly God for a new generation. We're rethinking him. How do we understand him now, based on our current world? And it's what we're doing now today. We have Satan as a very malevolent being against God, a very benevolent being. God only does good all the time and loving, et cetera, et cetera. That's certainly not what we see in the Old Testament, that he always does good and is loving, et cetera, et cetera. But now that's what we have, because we've seen it in Jesus. Again, literature, not reality. The reality might be he was always good and loving and everything, but somebody portrayed him in ways that he didn't want to be portrayed, or in ways that he wanted us to evolve out of. Man, that's complicated as I'm even saying it out loud. I hope that makes
sense. The book by Kugel, The Great Shift? Is that about that, or am I thinking of
It is
something
about
else?
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Riston read that. You read The Great Shift, didn't you, Rist? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kugel, if you guys haven't read, well, never mind. It's anything Kugel writes, James Kugel writes is fantastic. But you'll be introduced to the whole world of Second Temple theology when you go into that. You'll see that movement, that evolution of things. That's the reason that we read all the pseudepigrapha and Septuagint, stuff like that, because you see the updates that they make in the stories. And that's what the New Testament does too. It updates. It needs to make it a little bit more clear for a new world. Or maybe it's not making it more clear. Maybe it's shifting it completely. Okay, so I think at least, I know what we've done tonight. I feel like tonight we've gone way outside of just the Satan. And we've brought up a lot of things that are probably really difficult to comprehend, or even if you do comprehend them, you're just like, I don't know that I like them all at all. And that's fair enough. Stay back with the Satan theme. Okay, I think we've seen, at least in Job here, that we don't have a Satan character, right? We have the Satan, and that he's used as a prop in order to get to the philosophical argument in the book that's trying to defend God, that's trying to say, hey, things just happen, right? Or we don't know why things happen sometimes, and you just got to trust, right? That's what the book's going to end up saying. God's bigger than all that. Okay, but there's no Satan being in this passage, just an accuser. Some kind of, but there is something spiritual in the text, at least. Again, I don't know about the reality, but in the text, at least, there's some kind of being that seems to be under God, right? So God is up here, and the Satan is right next to him. He's under him because he has to get permission, but he is still doing evil, catastrophe. He's killing kids. I don't know what you want to call that, right? That seems pretty bad, right? He's killing all of Job's children. He's giving him sores. He's making life miserable for him, stealing all of his wealth. He's doing bad things. So you can see how this is going to move to, hey, there's some kind of spiritual being in Job, to several hundred years later, somebody who like seems to be this actual character all the time, right? Like a devil. So this is going to become this. Before all this, we've got all kinds of bad guys like Leviathan and Behemoth and Mephistopheles and I don't even know what are the other ones. Baal, right? Chemosh, which is questionable, by the way. This decade, people are wondering whether that's actually a god or not. But all these bad things, these chaos monsters that show up. But now it's starting to be found here, and it's going to move. All right. So in the Old Testament, let's see if there's anything else here that's important. Yep. No, I think we got everything. So in the Old Testament, I'm only going to deal with Zechariah and First Chronicles, I think. And we'll do both of those next week, and then we'll get into the New Testament, or we'll get into Second Temple stuff. Okay. Again, Satan's not going to show up an awful lot, but the devil will, and we'll kind of see how they go back and forth. And Satan does show up. They do use the Hebrew word. They transliterate it into Greek in there, so we'll see that too. But if you want to read ahead, read Zechariah 3 and see there Satan. And read First Chronicles 21. So First Chronicles 21 is the first time that Satan appears by himself, Satan instead of the Satan. And remember, Chronicles is a post-exilic book. It's one of your latest ones. Very post-exilic, probably. Maybe as late as the Persian, maybe even Greek period.
So I'm getting confused. There
Yeah.
is a real Satan.
Are we talking about in the literature or are we talking about reality?
I don't know. You've got me too mixed up
I'm sorry.
between the Satan and now Satan appears by himself. Well, what was the other one that we just finished?
So all references to Satan in the Old Testament, all of them are the Satan, except for this one passage in Chronicles where it doesn't have that first word, that definite article on it, the. It seems to be more of a proper name there.
Okay.
Okay, but we'll talk about all that next week. I was just preparing you for it. That's kind of my little teaser. He
Okay.
does show up there, but that's a very late text. I mean, that's as close to Second Temple as you can get.
Okay.
Okay, right? So on the chronology, this is going to be real important, right? With Jesus here, and this is year 0 here. This is most of your texts are going to be in the 500s. Okay? This one is probably 300s to 200s. It's much later. It's like at the same time as, so this is Chronicles, this is Daniel. Okay, like post-Persian period, maybe as late as Greek, Alexander the Great. But Daniel's not even written in Hebrew. It's got a lot of Aramaic in it. It is written in Hebrew, it has both, but a lot of people say it's originally written either in Aramaic or even Greek. So,
And then in the New Testament, sometimes there's Satan, but then sometimes there's Diabolos. And
right,
they're
devil.
used interchangeably, kind of, sort of, but kind of also not really, depending on the
Yeah,
context.
we're gonna have to make those decisions when we get to it. Yeah. They seem, I mean, in some places it'll literally say Satan, the devil, like it'll say it right next to each other. Like Revelation will do that several times.
Mhm.
The great devil
But then, like,
named
the
Satan.
guy in Matthew that tempts Jesus is a Diabolos. And
Right.
then he calls Judas Diabolos later as like a tool of Satan. But Diabolos is the word to describe the tool of Satan, even though it was Diabolos who tempted him in the desert, the wilderness.
Right, because that's what Judas is doing as well.
Yeah.
Right? Tempting him. Right? Which is also what Peter is doing. Tempting. We're gonna see all of that, right? When he says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Again, he's being an adversary. He's stopping him from doing what he's supposed to be doing, which is what
But
we've
when the
seen so
gospel writers talk about the person that tempts him, they don't call that person Satan. All of them.
correct. You mean in the wilderness, that one? Right. It's called a diabolos. Right. That's right. But by then we've made an evolutional switch, right? That the devil probably at that point is equated with this being, this Satan being, this malevolent creature. But we're gonna have to see that. We're not there yet. And there might be still
So the
some
answer
movement.
is it's messy, Kathy.
Yes. Yeah, and I should probably mention this in the very, oh my goodness. It's already 9:20. Okay, we gotta stop, but I'll mention it. Remember, what we're trying to do in theology is get all of these texts to match and then come up with an answer, right? Like this is what Satan is. But Satan isn't one thing. Satan is what the authors make Satan out to be. And some passages will make him out to be one thing, and other passages will make him out to be something else. So it doesn't have to be consistent. This is what we've been talking about for years, the multivocality of the text, right? It doesn't have to be univocal. All the texts don't have to mention Satan the exact same way or describe God the same way, because some authors understand him differently than other authors. I don't think the contradictions will be so overwhelming that you should throw your Bible out the window, but obviously, because I'm still studying it and still in love with Jesus, but there are definitely some passages that disagree with each other. I think anyway. And I've been trying to show that over the years if you've been hanging out with me.
All right. On that note, goodbye, Facebook.
All right. Goodbye, Facebook.
Happy birthday, Brad.
Yeah.